Dr. Amara Williams closed her eyes as the wealthy woman's voice grew louder behind her. "I paid $8,000 for this seat, and I will not sit next to hospital staff." Amara had just finished a 16-hour surgery saving a life. She had no idea she was about to save another one in the most unexpected way. As Amara finally peeled off her surgical gloves at 6:47 a.m., her hands remained steady despite exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. The child's heart had been a puzzle of congenital defects that would have been fatal without intervention. 4 hours of microsurgery, repairing vessels smaller than pencil leads, rebuilding chambers that nature had failed to form correctly. "Amara, you need rest," said Dr. Marcus Peterson, the hospital's chief of surgery, watching her review postoperative notes for the third time. "Emma's stable. The repair was flawless. You've outdone yourself again." Amara nodded absently, her mind replaying every suture, every critical decision. This obsessive perfectionism had driven her from Detroit's roughest neighborhood to become the youngest chief of cardiac surgery in the hospital's 150-year history. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Flight to Boston leaves in 3 hours. Medical conference presentation confirmed for 2 p.m. The Northeastern Medical Symposium." She had been invited to present her revolutionary pediatric heart repair technique to the world's most prestigious cardiac surgeons. Professional recognition that would cement her international reputation. Dr. Williams called Sarah Chen, her surgical resident, approaching with reports. "Emma's parents want to thank you before you leave." In the family waiting area, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez clutched each other, eyes red from terror and prayer. When they saw Amara approaching in surgical scrubs, both parents stood immediately. "Doctor," Maria whispered, voice breaking with emotion. "They said Emma might not survive the night, but you saved our baby." Carlos, a construction worker whose calloused hands spoke of hard labor, reached out tentatively. "Doctor, we don't have much money, but if there's anything—" "Your daughter's recovery is all the payment I need," Amara interrupted gently. "Emma will dance at her quinceañera, graduate college, maybe become a doctor herself." The taxi ride to O'Hare gave her time to review presentation notes. Innovative approaches to complex congenital heart defects in pediatric patients. Her technique had reduced mortality rates by 40% and surgical time by an hour. Work that would save thousands of children's lives. At the airport, she upgraded to first class, a rare indulgence. But after 3 sleepless days, she needed every advantage to arrive ready for her presentation. The conference would include cardiac surgeons from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. This presentation could change pediatric heart surgery worldwide. Settling into seat 1A, Amara allowed herself a moment of pride. 20 years ago, she had been Amara Williams from Detroit's Cass Corridor. Daughter of a single mother who cleaned offices at night to fund her daughter's education. Today, she was Dr. Amara Williams, pioneering cardiac surgeon, invited speaker at international conferences. The plane filled with typical first-class clientele executives, wealthy retirees, politicians. Amara closed her eyes, hoping for rest before reaching cruising altitude. "Excuse me, stewardess." A shrill voice cut through the cabin's peace like a scalpel. "There's been some kind of mistake here." Amara opened her eyes to see a woman standing in the aisle, radiating outrage that comes from a lifetime of getting her way. Margaret Whitmore was 62, though plastic surgery tried hiding that fact. Her blonde hair required weekly appointments at Chicago's most expensive salon. Her cream St. John suit with matching pearls cost more than most monthly salaries. Margaret's expression told the real story. A woman, never denied anything. Never forced to wait with common people, never considering her worldview might be wrong. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Whitmore?" asked Jessica Martinez, the lead flight attendant. Approaching with professional courtesy masking years of difficult passengers. Margaret's manicured finger, adorned with a diamond ring worth Emma Rodriguez's entire surgery, pointed directly at Amara. "This person is clearly in the wrong section. Hospital staff belong in coach, not first class with paying customers like myself." The words hit Amara like a physical blownote, unexpected, but cruel in their casualness. After 3 days saving lives, she was reduced to this person by someone who had never contributed anything meaningful beyond her husband's bank account. The cabin fell silent. Every first-class passenger turned to witness the drama. In seat 2C, retired federal judge Bernard Hayes shook his head in disgust. In 3A, tech executive Jennifer Morrison discreetly pulled out her phone. In 2B, businessman Walter Kozlov muttered disapproval in Russian. "Ma'am," Jessica began carefully, "all passengers have valid tickets for their seats." "I don't care what your computer says," Margaret's voice rose. "I can see she's wearing scrubs. She's obviously some nurse or orderly who got upgraded by mistake. I paid $8,000 for this seat, and I will not be made uncomfortable by inappropriate passengers." Amara remained motionless, hands folded, breathing controlled. Medical school had taught her to stay calm under pressure, think clearly when others lost control. It served her in emergencies and would serve her now. Margaret continued, voice growing shriller. "There are standards to maintain, and I'm appalled this airline would allow such a situation. I don't understand why airlines accommodate these people in first class. It's clearly charity seating, political correctness, and I resent subsidizing it with my premium purchase." Amara felt familiar chest tightness, the same sensation during residency when attending physicians. Questioned her competence based on appearance. The anger that had fueled her drive to excellence for 2 decades. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Dr. Peterson. A text made her blood run cold. Emergency at Presbyterian Hospital. VIP patient incoming. Massive heart attack during board meeting. Multiple vessel occlusion. Need you immediately upon landing. Patient is Richard Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries. The name hit like lightning. She Googled Richard Whitmore CEO. The image showed a distinguished man beside a blonde woman at a charity gala. Caption: Richard and Margaret Whitmore at annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. The irony was breathtaking. This woman trying to remove her from first class was married to the man whose life now depended entirely on Amara's surgical skills. "Mrs. Whitmore," Amara said quietly, voice carrying calm authority that commanded operating room respect. Margaret spun around, eyes blazing. "Don't speak to me directly. You should apologize for this misunderstanding and move to your proper seat. Your attempt to engage shows how inappropriate this situation is." "I am in my proper seat," Amara replied evenly, standing slowly. At 5'6", she wasn't physically imposing, but her bearing confidence from holding human hearts commanded attention. "This is absurd." Margaret laughed like breaking crystal. "The only conversation needed is you explaining how you scammed your way into first class. Stolen ticket, fake credit card. I'm curious about fraud mechanics." Judge Hayes leaned forward. For decades on the federal bench, thousands of discrimination cases, this was textbook prejudice, and his judicial instincts were outraged. "Ma'am," he interjected quietly, "perhaps your assumptions are incorrect." Margaret turned to the elderly judge. "Sir, this is clearly someone being where they don't belong. One glance tells you everything." "Actually," Judge Hayes replied with measured courtroom tone, "one glance tells me you're judging by appearance rather than facts. In my experience, that's usually a mistake." Margaret's face flushed red. She wasn't accustomed to challenges, especially being made to feel wrong. "Sir, this doesn't require legal analysis. It's simply appropriate seating arrangements." Jennifer Morrison looked up from recording. "Actually, it requires basic human decency, which appears in short supply here." Margaret whirled around. "Excuse me, young lady, but this doesn't concern you. I'm ensuring first-class passengers receive paid-for service." "What you paid for," Jennifer replied calmly, "is transportation, not the right to humiliate passengers based on prejudices." The confrontation escalated, drawing cabin-wide attention. Jessica looked increasingly uncomfortable, wanting resolution but unsure how to proceed without worsening things. "Jessica," Margaret commanded with household staff tone, "move this woman immediately, or I'm calling my lawyer upon landing. The Whitmore family has flown with this airline 20 years. We expect better treatment." Mrs. Whitmore, Jessica replied, professional patience wearing thin. I cannot move someone simply because another passenger objects to their presence. Objects to obvious fraud. Margaret's voice reached new octaves. This woman clearly isn't first-class material. She's wearing hospital scrubs, for God's sake. When did you last see a doctor flying commercial in work clothes? Amara stood slowly, movement drawing every eye. When she spoke, her voice carried quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the final word in life and death situations. Mrs. Whitmore, before making more assumptions, you should know I'm Dr. Amara Williams, Chief of Cardiac Surgery at Chicago Presbyterian Hospital. Deafening silence followed. Margaret's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Around the cabin, passengers murmured. The situation's dynamic completely shifted. Margaret's recovery was swift, arrogance reasserting like armor against inconvenient truth. Oh, please. You expect anyone to believe that? A real doctor wouldn't wear wrinkled scrubs on commercial flights. If you were actually a surgeon, you'd dress appropriately and fly private. You're right about one thing, Amara said calmly, reaching into her carry-on. Surgeons usually wouldn't dress like this commercially, unless she had just spent 16 hours straight performing emergency surgery on a failing child's heart. Then caught the first flight to present at an international medical conference. She pulled out hospital ID, medical license, business cards, conference invitation. Unless she was Dr. Amara Williams, invited to present revolutionary pediatric cardiac pre-ac surgery techniques to the world's leading heart surgeons at the Northeastern Medical Symposium. Margaret snatched credentials, examining them intensely, like a detective seeking forgeries. Her face showed surprise, skepticism, uncertainty, finally grudging acknowledgement. Well, Margaret said, returning documents reluctantly, even if legitimate. You're inappropriately dressed for first class. There are appearance standards to maintain. Judge Hayes had heard enough. Ma'am, are you seriously criticizing a surgeon for wearing surgical scrubs after emergency surgery? Do you understand the absurdity? I understand, Margaret replied stiffly. Appropriate times and places for work clothing and first class on commercial airlines is neither. Jennifer Morrison looked up again. So you'd prefer she changed before rushing to present medical research that could save children's lives? Fascinating priorities. Walter Kozlov spoke for the first time, accented English carrying weight of someone who escaped genuine oppression. In my country, we recognized people by character, not clothing. This woman saves lives. What do you do that's important? The question hung like smoke. Margaret had never been asked to justify existence based on contribution rather than wealth. She had inherited social position, married into greater wealth, spent life as professional socialite. Her days filled with charity luncheons, shopping, managing household staff. I'll have you know, Margaret said defensively, I'm very active in charitable organizations. I serve on 3 major foundation boards. Serving on boards, Judge Hayes observed, usually means attending meetings and writing checks. This woman actually saves children's lives with her hands. Margaret felt everyone's attention, weight, and for the first time in decades, it wasn't admiring. These educated, accomplished people looked at her with disgust and pity mixture. You're missing the point, she said, voice rising. This isn't about profession. It's about appropriate behavior and maintaining standards. First class should be exclusive. Exclusive based on what? Jennifer asked pointedly. Ability to buy expensive tickets. Because Dr. Williams clearly has first-class tickets. Exclusive based on class, Margaret replied, immediately realizing how her words sounded. Ah, said Judge Hayes, now we're getting to the heart. You don't believe she belongs because she's black. That's not, Margaret began, but Walter interrupted. In Russia, we had word for this. We called it exactly what it is. The accusation hung heavy in recycled cabin air. Margaret felt her face burning with embarrassment and anger. She had spent life carefully avoiding such direct confrontations about beliefs, surrounding herself with shared worldview people, or those too dependent on her wealth to challenge her. I resent the implication, Margaret said, voice shaking. I am not racist. I simply believe in maintaining appropriate standards. Standards, Amara repeated quietly, the word carrying weight that made everyone lean forward. Let me tell you about standards, Mrs. Whitmore. She stood again, presence commanding first-class attention. My standard is spending 16 hours in surgery, saving a child's life. My standard is pioneering techniques, reducing infant mortality rates. My standard is being called for the most complex cases because other surgeons trust my skill. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried absolute conviction force. My standard is earning position through excellence, not inheritance. My standard is being judged by competence, not appearance. Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: genuine shame. Not embarrassment at social misconduct, but deep, soul-searching shame from recognizing moral failings. But pride wouldn't allow complete backing down. Even so, she said weakly, there are appropriate public dressing ways. You're absolutely right, Amara agreed, surprising everyone. When I attend conferences, galas, or social events, I dress appropriately for those occasions. But when rushing from emergency surgery to catch flights for life-saving medical research presentations, I prioritize substance over style. She paused, letting words sink in. The question is, Mrs. Whitmore, what do you prioritize? As the plane prepared for takeoff, tension filled the cabin like storm clouds. Margaret sat rigidly, mind racing between indignation and growing unease. Other passengers returned to activities, but she felt their judgment like physical weight. Amara tried resting, but Margaret's presence across the aisle was constant irritant. She could hear the woman muttering comments about civilization decline, people not knowing their place, and lowered standards consequences. What Margaret didn't know was Amara. Reading increasingly urgent messages about her husband's condition, Dr. Peterson's texts painted dire pictures. Richard Whitmore arrived critically. Massive anterior wall-me, 3-vessel disease. Emergency catheterization shows 95% LAD occlusion. 90% circumflex, 85% RCA. Needs immediate surgical intervention. Medical translation. Margaret's husband was dying. His heart attack caused massive damage, and multiple major arteries were almost completely blocked. Without immediate surgery, he had hours to live. The next message was more urgent. Condition deteriorating rapidly. Maximum life support, but we need your expertise immediately. This requires the most complex multi-vessel bypass we've ever attempted. No one else can handle this complexity level. Amara looked across at Margaret, now loudly complaining to anyone listening about inappropriate airline staff behavior and passenger quality decline. She described how this incident would result in management complaints, business withdrawal threats, and compensation demands. The irony was profound, almost making Amara dizzy. This woman, publicly humiliating her based on racial prejudice, had no idea her husband's life now depended entirely on the surgical skills of the person she was demeaning. Another message: Amara, understand this gravity. Richard Whitmore is Chicago's most prominent businessman. If we lose him, there'll be massive publicity. But more importantly, this man has 3 children and 7 grandchildren. We need a miracle, and you're the only one who can provide it. Dr. Peterson emphasized the case complexity correctly. Multi-vessel cardiac surgery was among medicine's most challenging procedures. It required not just technical skill, but artistic visions. Seeing the heart not as it was, but as it could be reconstructed. Perhaps a dozen surgeons nationally could attempt such procedures. Fewer could succeed. Amara was one of only 3 surgeons who had pioneered the technique required to save Richard Whitmore's life. The procedure involved completely bypassing multiple blocked arteries using grafts from patients' own vessels, essentially rebuilding the heart's blood supply system from scratch. The flight attendant approached Amara discreetly. "Doctor, I'm terribly sorry about this situation. Can we do anything for your comfort? Perhaps relocate Mrs. Whitmore to another seat." "Actually," Amara said quietly, "could you ask Mrs. Whitmore to speak with me privately? Tell her it's urgent medical business." Jessica approached Margaret hesitantly, having learned to tread carefully around the volatile passenger. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Williams would like to speak privately. She says it's urgent medical business. Absolutely not, Margaret snapped, voice carrying to half the cabin. I have nothing to say to her, and she has nothing I want to hear. This is probably some lecture attempt about my behavior, and I won't tolerate it. Amara stood and walked directly to Margaret's seat, her movement causing first-class conversations to pause. Mrs. Whitmore, this is about your husband Richard. For the first time since confrontation began, Margaret's arrogant mask completely slipped. Color drained from her face, and hands began trembling. What about Richard? How do you possibly know about my husband? Because, Amara said gently, sitting in the empty seat beside Margaret, I'm the surgeon who's going to try saving his life when we land. Margaret stared at Amara as if hearing foreign language. What are you talking about? Richard is fine. He's at his office. He has a board meeting this morning. Amara showed Margaret her phone screen, filled with urgent hospital messages. Your husband suffered a massive heart attack during that board meeting 2 hours ago. He's at Presbyterian Hospital right now, condition critical. The surgical team is waiting for me to perform emergency cardiac surgery. Margaret read messages, eyes growing wider with each word. Medical terminology was largely incomprehensible, but urgency was unmistakable. This can't be real. Richard just had his annual physical last month. The doctor said his heart was fine. Mrs. Whitmore, Amara explained gently. Switching to compassionate but authoritative tone used with crisis families, heart attacks don't always announce themselves. Your husband's condition is extremely serious. He has blockages in multiple major arteries, and time is absolutely critical. But you're, Margaret stammered, worldview crashing around her. I'm the cardiac surgeon who's going to save your husband's life, Amara finished quietly. If it can be saved. The silence was deafening. Margaret slumped as her situation's full weight crashed down. The woman she had publicly humiliated for an hour, called inappropriate, unworthy, fraudulent, was now the only person standing between her husband and death. I don't understand, Margaret whispered, barely audibly. Why didn't anyone call me? They tried, Amara explained, showing hospital contact attempts on her phone. The hospital called me first, because I'm the only surgeon in the city qualified for this operation type. They probably couldn't reach you because your phone was in airplane mode. Margaret fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, finding it in airplane mode with 8 missed calls from unrecognized numbers. The reality hit her like physical blows. While she had been berating a cardiac surgeon for wearing scrubs, her husband had been dying. How bad is it? She asked, voice cracking with emotion. Amara looked into Margaret's eyes, seeing not the arrogant woman who tried humiliating her, but a terrified wife facing possible husband loss. Medical training kicked in, overriding personal feelings about Margaret's behavior. I won't lie, Amara said, voice gentle but honest. It's very serious. Your husband suffered what we call massive anterior wall myocardial infarction with multi-vessel involvement. In layman's terms, he's had severe heart attack that damaged large heart muscle portions and blocked several major arteries. Margaret's face went white. Is he going to die? Not if I can help it, Amara replied with quiet confidence. I've performed this surgery type hundreds of times. The procedure your husband needs is called multivessel coronary artery bypass graft. It's complex, but I've pioneered several techniques that dramatically improved success rates. Why you? Margaret asked, immediately realizing how the question sounded. I mean, why did they call you specifically? Because, Amara explained patiently. There are only a few surgeons nationally who specialize in this complex cardiac reconstruction type. Your husband's case requires not just technical skill, but extensive experience with the most challenging cases. She pulled up her professional profile, showing Margaret her credentials. I've performed over 2,000 cardiac surgeries, published 47 research papers on advanced cardiac techniques, and trained surgeons worldwide. 3 years ago, I developed a new multivessel bypass approach that reduced mortality rates by 35%. Margaret stared at the screen, seeing for the first time the accomplishment magnitude represented by the woman beside her. Publications in New England Journal of Medicine, American Heart Association leadership positions, international speaking engagements, awards from medical societies worldwide. You're really that accomplished? Margaret asked weakly. Mrs. Whitmore, Amara replied gently. I didn't become chief of cardiac surgery at one of the nation's top hospitals by accident. I earned it through years of study, training, and dedication. Margaret looked at Amara with new eyes, finally seeing past prejudices to the accomplished professional sitting beside her. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears beginning to form. I'm so sorry. I was horrible to you, and now you're going to save Richard. That's what I do, Amara replied simply. I save lives. Regardless of whose they are, or how their family members treat me. Margaret's transformation was immediate and complete. The arrogant socialite was gone, replaced by a terrified wife who suddenly understood her entire world depended on the compassion of someone she had tried to humiliate. Will you still operate on Richard after how I treated you? Margaret asked, voicing the fear consuming her. Amara looked at her with something that might have been pity. Mrs. Whitmore, when I became a doctor, I took an oath. Part of that oath says, first, do no harm. Another part commits me to helping healing wherever I find it. Your behavior doesn't change that oath, but why? Margaret asked, genuinely confused by selfless service concepts. I was terrible to you. I said awful things. I tried having you removed from the plane. Because, Amara said, as the plane began final descent, this is who I am. This is who I was raised to be. And this is why I became a doctor, to help people, even when they can't help themselves. Margaret broke down completely, sobbing in her seat as her husband's condition and her own behavior's full weight crashed down. Other passengers watched the dramatic transformation with surprise and sympathy mixture. Judge Hayes, who had witnessed the entire interaction, leaned over. Mrs. Whitmore, you're very fortunate that Dr. Williams is a better person than you gave her credit for being. As the plane touched down at Logan International Airport, Amara was already in motion. She had changed back into fresh surgical scrubs, gathered medical equipment, and was preparing to rush directly to the hospital. Dr. Williams, Margaret called out as Amara prepared to leave. Amara turned, mind already focused on the surgical challenge ahead. The 3-hour flight had given her time to mentally prepare for one of her career's most complex procedures. Thank you, Margaret said simply, words carrying genuine gratitude and deep shame. Wait, and I'm sorry, for everything. Amara nodded acknowledgement. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband will need you to be strong. Get to the hospital as quickly as you can. Ask for Dr. Peterson in the cardiac surgery unit. He'll explain everything while I'm preparing for surgery. As Amara disappeared into the deplaning crowd, Margaret remained in her seat, watching the woman she had tried to humiliate rush off to save her husband's life. 4 hours later, Margaret sat in Presbyterian Hospital's cardiac surgery waiting room, still wearing her expensive designer outfit, but looking completely different. The confidence and arrogance defining her personality had been stripped away, leaving only a frightened woman waiting to learn if her husband would live or die. Dr. Peterson had explained the situation in medical terms Margaret barely understood, but the gravity was clear. Richard's condition was critical. Surgery would take 6 to 8 hours. There were significant risks, including stroke, kidney failure, and death. Dr. Williams is the best we have, Dr. Peterson had assured her. If anyone can save your husband, it's her. In the operating room, Dr. Amara Williams was in her element. The sterile environment, focused team, life and death precision required this was where she belonged. Richard Whitmore lay unconscious on the table, chest open, heart exposed and vulnerable. The surgery was as complex as anticipated. 3 major arteries were severely blocked, requiring careful plaque removal and new pathway creation using vessels harvested from Richard's own leg. Each connection had to be perfect millimeter in precision, could mean life and death difference. Suction Amara commanded quietly, voice steady, despite pressure. Around her, the surgical team moved with practiced precision. Dr. Sarah Chen, her senior resident, assisted with delicate graft vessel preparation work. "How's his pressure?" Amara asked the anesthesiologist. "Stable, but barely. His heart is working at about 30% capacity." Amara nodded, hands never pausing in their work. This was what she had trained for: cases, pushing medical possibility boundaries, surgeries, separating good doctors from great ones. 3 hours into the procedure, she encountered a complication that made her heart skip beats. Richard's anterior wall, his heart's front, was more damaged than preoperative scans had indicated. Large heart muscle sections had died from blood flow lack. Dr. Chen whispered, "Tissue damage is extensive. Do we have enough viable muscle to work with?" Amara studied the heart carefully, mind racing through possibilities. This moment would define not just Richard's future, but potentially her own career. She could close him up, tell the family she had done everything possible, that damage was too extensive. Or she could attempt something never tried before: complete heart anterior wall reconstruction using a technique she had been developing in research but never performed on human patients. "We're going to rebuild it," she announced quietly. Dr. Chen looked surprised. "Doctor, that technique is still experimental." "Experimental, but sound," Amara replied with quiet confidence. "This man's only chance is if we're willing to push possibility boundaries." For the next 4 hours, Amara performed what would later be described by medical colleagues as surgical artistry. Using techniques combining established procedures with innovative approaches she had developed through years of research, she essentially rebuilt Richard Whitmore's heart. She created new blood flow pathways, reinforced damaged muscle tissue, and restored function to areas other surgeons would have considered beyond repair. It was surgery that would be written about in medical journals, studied by cardiac surgery residents, and remembered as a watershed moment in the field. At 2:47 a.m., Dr. Amara Williams finally emerged from the operating room. Surgical scrubs damp with perspiration, face showing exhaustion of someone who had just performed one of her career's most complex surgeries. Margaret jumped up from her chair, where she had been sitting for nearly 8 hours, surrounded by family members who had maintained vigil throughout the night. "Mrs. Whitmore," Amara announced to the assembled group, voice carrying quiet authority of someone who had just held human life in her hands. "The surgery was successful. Your husband is stable and should make a full recovery." Relief in the room was palpable. Margaret's knees nearly buckled as tension she had been carrying for hours finally released. Richard's brother David, a successful attorney who had never been rendered speechless in his life, found himself unable to form words. Margaret approached Amara, tears streaming down her face. "Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. After the way I behaved on the plane, after the horrible things I said, you still saved my husband's life." Amara looked at the woman who had tried to humiliate her just hours earlier. "Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't save your husband's life, despite your behavior. I saved it because saving lives is what I do, it's who I am. But I was so cruel to you," Margaret sobbed. "I judged you. I tried to have you removed. I said terrible things about you, in front of everyone." "You did," Amara acknowledged simply. "But your husband's life was never dependent on how you treated me. It was dependent on my ability to perform surgery, and that ability doesn't change based on how patients' families behave." Margaret fell to her knees, overwhelming gratitude and shame consuming her. "I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry. How can I ever make this right?" Amara helped Margaret to her feet. "You can start by remembering this moment. You can remember that the person you tried to humiliate based on the color of her skin and her clothing was the person who saved the most important thing in your world." 6 months later, Margaret Whitmore established the Williams Foundation for Medical Excellence, a scholarship fund specifically designed to support young Black students pursuing medical careers. The foundation's mission statement read, "Excellence has no color, and healing hands come in all forms."
The first recipient was a young Black woman from Detroit's inner city who wanted to become a cardiac surgeon, inspired by a story she had heard about a doctor who saved a man's life after his wife had treated her with prejudice and cruelty. Dr. Amara Williams attended the scholarship ceremony, not as guest of honor, but as Presbyterian Hospital medical staff representative. When Margaret introduced her to scholarship recipients, she said something that surprised everyone in attendance.
This woman taught me life's most important lesson, that true class isn't about money or status, it's about character, competence, and compassion. She could have refused to help my family after how I treated her. Instead, she saved my husband's life and taught me what it means to be truly human. The audience applauded. But Amara's response was characteristically humble. The real lesson here isn't about me forgiving Mrs. Whitmore. It's about all of us learning to see past surface judgments to recognize humanity and potential. In every person we meet, the most powerful revenge against prejudice isn't anger or retaliation, it's success, excellence, and the grace to help those who have wronged you discover their own capacity for growth and redemption. If this story of overcoming prejudice and finding redemption moved you, subscribe to our channel for more stories that prove true strength lies not in putting others down, but in lifting them up, even when they don't deserve it.